Now, in this edition of Let's Talk Some Star Wars, we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll that asked, which version of the Clone Wars do you prefer? The 2003 or Tartakovsky version, or the newer 2008 version that is currently wrapping up on Disney+. I'll then be reading and responding to some of your comments, as well as showing off some of the artwork that was sent in. Though I don't know that I'll get to all of it, I've had quite a bit sent in since the last video, so some might have to be saved until next time. And speaking of art and big responses, just let me take a quick moment to say thank you to everyone who contacted me about my sequel trilogy project offering to help. This video here is getting done and up a few days later than intended because of the overwhelming response and trying to keep up with it. And there are still some of you I'm going back and forth with in emails or haven't had a chance to contact at all, so please do hold tight. I am trying to respond to every single person who contacted me about this. Not to mention, still get settled into my new place after moving. And speaking of that, hopefully the audio sounds okay in this video, or at least as okay as it ever does. Alright, so let's now finally get to the results of the poll, where we'll see that 43% of voters prefer the 2008 version of the Clone Wars over the 2003 version, while 9% voted the other way and prefer the 2003 version. There were also 21% of people who said they enjoyed both equally, 18% who have only seen one version of the Clone Wars, and then a final 9% who haven't seen either version of the Clone Wars. And so then when we do some recalculating here and look only at those who have seen both versions of the Clone Wars, well, 59% of them prefer the 08 version, 12% the 03 version, and 29% say they enjoy both versions equally. Okay, and just to give my first quick initial thoughts on the results here, well, this was once again one of those times I had no idea what they would look like. I know there is a lot of love out there for the 2003 version, and I get asked all the time to do more videos about it. But it does feel like, and the results do confirm this, more people prefer the 08 Clone Wars over the 03 Clone Wars, and I think there's a lot of different reasons for that, and many were talked about in the comments, so it's probably a good time to get to those comments, starting as we always do with the top-rated comment, which this week came to us from Blast5240, who said, "The Clone Wars will always be closest to my heart, but there are some good moments in the 2003 version, like Mace Windu basically a god, Grievous actually being terrifying, that moment the clone took on a whole squad of droids by himself, the ARC troopers, etc." Okay, so one of the coolest things in the comments this week was just the amount of respect people had for both versions of the Clone Wars, no matter which one they preferred or how much they preferred it. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for people expressing their opinions pretty much any way they want, short of truly hateful speech, not just hurt your feelings speech that gets called hate speech. But there was a lot of people saying, this is all the reasons why I love this version more, but the other one isn't all that bad either. Or comments like this one from Ashen Batau, who said, "The knighting of Anakin Skywalker and his duel with Asajj Ventress on Yavin 4, along with the surface invasion of Coruscant, will forever remain in my mind as some of the best Star Wars I've seen and highlights of the 2003 Clone Wars Volume series. The duel especially was packed with so much raw emotion and impact, as well as good continuity with how the series led directly into the events of Revenge of the Sith. Even though I prefer the 2008 Clone Wars, I would highly recommend Tartakovsky's series. The man is a legend in the field of animation, and I am disappointed it wasn't classified as canon among other pre-Disney works. It is seriously an underrated gem." We also had this comment from Captain DC, who said, "I think that Clone Wars 2003 was the beginning and end of the war. It connected episode 2 and 3 really well. The 2008 Clone Wars is during the center of the war, and expanded the galaxy." And you know, the funny thing is that as much as I love and enjoy the 08 version, that we have 7 seasons now where it goes into all these great stories and characters that have become some of the best in all of Star Wars, quite honestly, at the same time, I can very much appreciate how streamlined the 03 version is. You can watch the whole thing in a few hours and feel like you got, relatively speaking, a short story that does a great job of bridging the gap between episodes 2 and 3. I mean, if you're someone who likes to sit down and watch all the Star Wars movies in chronological order and wanted to include Clone Wars in that run, I'd probably recommend just doing the 03 version over the 08 version because, again, it's more streamlined and to the point, and it's not going to take you a couple days. Plus, it tends to just fit a bit neater into the story, or maybe I should say less is more in this case. Okay, that then brings us to this comment from David Hills, who said, "I voted I love both equally, but there's a lot more nuance to it." I love every minute of Gendy's version, and I always watch the whole thing every time. Plus, Grievous is awesome. The 2008 Clone Wars has great moments, and I've grown to love Ahsoka, but there are lots of episodes, mostly from the first 2 seasons, I unapologetically skip when I rewatch it, and I hate the 2008 film. The 2003 Clone Wars is shorter and 100% awesome, no filler. 2008 Clone Wars is, on average, great, and there's a lot more episodes to enjoy, but some episodes are totally skippable for me. We also then had this comment from Jason Pickering, who said, I enjoy them equally. The 03 series was consistently really good through its run, whereas the 08 series had really high highs but also really low lows. Don't get me wrong, I love the 08 series, but people tend to only remember the good arcs. Go watch the first 2 seasons and tell me even half of them are great. Okay, so I think the biggest difference between the two is that the 08 version kind of took on a life of its own. It became its own thing and is far more than just a show that bridges 2 movies, which I suppose you could see as either a good thing or a bad thing depending on your point of view. It does have a lot more of what you could call filler episodes or tell stories that really aren't all that important to the bigger picture. Whereas, sure, you could say some of the 03 is filler, but it's again far more streamlined and is about, more or less, telling one single story that closely ties into the bigger picture, whereas the newer Clone Wars tells many stories within this time period, which again aren't always the most important or relevant. Though that's certainly not to say they're not good stories, though yes, some arcs are, of course, better than others. Alright, and moving on now, we have this comment from Little Stevie and the Evens, who said, 2003 version, for the simple fact that it did Grievous justice. We also had this one from Luis Valencia, who said, I prefer the 08 series as a whole, but I wish they had stuck with the 03 version of Grievous. And there were a lot of people in the comments this week who lamented the loss of the 03 version of Grievous, that he essentially goes from a terrifying Jedi-killing monster to a villain who's always running away in the 08 version, shaking his fist in anger and hoping to get his revenge someday. And since our last Battle of the Heroes and Villains video covered Grievous, I'll direct you to that, a link to which can be found in the description below, instead of rehashing many of the things talked about in that video. But to sum it up, yes, it is a shame we lost that version of Grievous. Alright, and moving on now, we have this comment from Rohan Bagal, who said, the 2003 Clone Wars had one of the most fluid animation and art styles I had ever seen. General Grievous was outstanding, but it's a story that falls a little bit flat. Mace Windu fighting droids with his hands was cool too, but it looks weird in the Star Wars universe. The 2008 has superior animation quality, and the way it develops the story of clones is outstanding. Some of the most thought-provoking arcs and character of Ahsoka really makes the 2008 Clone Wars complete. Loss of a threatening Grievous is really a shame, though. And your comment here touched on one of my favorite things about the 08 version, what it did for the clones. I mean, the movies did almost nothing with them, not that they really had time to explore all the clones and such. The 03 series then made them a bit cooler and in some cases more badass, but the 08 series turned them into actual characters. The Umbara arc in Season 4, to me, was Clone Wars at its finest. I probably put it in my top 3 or 4 arcs overall. It was just an incredible story about the clones. Alright, and moving on now, we have this comment from Michael Oliveris, who said, they both are in my headcanon. I pretend somehow they make sense watching them back to back. We also had this one from Lance Curry, who said, I think they should have combined the storylines, somewhat implementing Anakin's first meeting with Asajj Ventress, Grievous's introduction on Hypori, and Anakin's knighting into the same series before the Battle of Christophsis, where Ahsoka is introduced. Also, add villain episodes featuring Grievous and Ventress. Dirge too, he was pretty wicked. And especially in hindsight and loving both series, I wish somehow they could be consistent with each other or combined somehow, like you suggest here. Because they both add, or could add, some great stuff to the canon. I mean, you bring up Anakin's knighting, one of my favorite moments in the 03 series, and we never see it in the 08 series. And another thing a lot of people talk about in regards to the 08 series is how it shows Anakin and Obi-Wan more like brothers, which is definitely a highlight of the series, and seems to feel more in line with how they are in Revenge of the Sith. But in some ways, I prefer their interactions in the 03 series, because it feels more in line with how they were in Attack of the Clones. And if we could kind of blend these two Clone Wars versions of Anakin together, I think we'd have a much better, much more consistent character all around. Okay, and before we move on to our final few comments, let me highlight this one from Leaf Green Sniper. He wins the award that I sometimes like to give out of being a good comment that is a bit too long to be read, or in this case is way too long to be read. Either way, he makes some good points here, and by all means, I encourage you to pause the video and read it yourself, though I imagine the text may turn out to be rather small if you're watching this on a phone. Either way, it's worth recognizing his post. Alright, now on to those final few comments, starting with this one from Missing No Minor, who said, "One had the best version of Grievous and Mace Windu, another complimented Anakin, Obi-Wan, and many other characters perfectly. The 2008 version is definitely an essential part of the Star Wars franchise, while the 2003 is one of the best additions to it for fans of the prequels." We also had this comment from Religious Otaku, who said, "I like them both for different reasons. While I love the characters in the 08 version, I absolutely loved the power the Jedi had in the 03, plus I waited every Friday to see those extra 3 to 5 minutes. Also, Ventress vs. Anakin was gold." Then this comment from the One Zoo Batman, who said, "Nostalgia aside, I'm a big fan of Tartakovsky's work. It was Samurai Jack's style of letting the action tell the story, with little dialogue that made the 2003 series something really special." Then this one from Timothy 7 times, who said, "They both have their perks. One has Ahsoka and Darth Maul, while the other one just has a better Grievous. Honestly, I prefer the original, but I understand why 2008 is better." We also had this one from Julia McDonald, who said, "I saw the 2003 version long before I saw the 2008, so it always has felt more like canon to me. I recently watched the 2008, and I love it, but I love the poetic beauty that is the 2003. And finally, this comment from Sam Dale, who said, "They are both outstanding, but for different reasons. 2003 is very epic and grand, and 2008 is very personal and character-driven. Both are amazing." And I have to agree, both versions are great, but for very different reasons. And as I said earlier, I wish there was a way to rectify the inconsistencies and make them both official canon. Not that being canon or not is some sort of stamp of approval, or something you must have in order to be appreciated. But in this case, I wish there was a way for both of these stories to just work with each other. Okay, and before wrapping this up, let me quickly give a shout out to 2 channels out there. One is my friend Comical Cheese, who put up some really fun Star Wars videos that, if you're a child of the 80s like me, you'll probably really get a kick out of, though certainly anyone and everyone can enjoy them. Another, though not Star Wars related, is the Dresden File podcast. So, if you're a fan of that series, do go and check them out. Well, that's all I've got for this time. My apologies if the audio on this wasn't up to my normal standards, but again, I'm getting set up in a new place, plus my throat is kind of dry and scratchy because it seems to be very dry in here. Anyway, now it's your turn to tell me what version of the Clone Wars you prefer and why, or to tell me what you thought of what I or anyone else had to say in this video. Either way, do leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.